Sarah sighed as she kicked off her high heels and collapsed onto her couch. Another long day at the office had left her back aching worse than ever. At 45, she was beginning to feel the years of hard work catching up with her body. The house felt too quiet, as it always did since her divorce 3 years ago. The silence reminded her how alone she was. She was about to reach for the TV remote when her phone rang. Sarah glanced at the screen and nearly dropped it when she saw the name. Mark. Her former stepson was calling after almost 10 years of only occasional texts and birthday wishes. "Hello," she answered, trying to hide the surprise in her voice. "Sarah? It's Mark. How are you?" His voice sounded deeper than she remembered, more mature. "Mark. This is unexpected." "I'm good, just got home from work. How about you? Where are you calling from?" "Last I heard you were in Thailand or somewhere." Mark laughed, the warm sound bringing back memories of family dinners long ago. "Actually, I'm calling from just across town. I moved back last week. I've been meaning to call you, but I wanted to get settled first." Sarah sat up straight, wincing at the pain in her lower back. "You're here? In town? Why didn't you tell me you were coming back?" It was a quick decision. The massage therapy school here offered me a teaching position I couldn't refuse. Sarah smiled. After her marriage to Mark's father had ended, she had worried about losing touch with Mark completely. Though he was only 7 years younger than her, she had always felt a motherly affection for him, even if the relationship had been more like friends than parent and child. "We should catch up," she said, rubbing her sore neck. "It's been too long." "How about dinner tomorrow? My treat," Mark suggested. Sarah agreed, and after hanging up, she found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. Having a friendly face back in town would be nice, especially one that reminded her of happier times. The next evening, Sarah spent more time than usual getting ready. She told herself it was simply because she wanted to look good after so many years, to show Mark that divorce and running her own business hadn't worn her down completely. She chose a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes and applied light makeup. When she opened her front door, she almost didn't recognize the man standing there. Gone was the young college student she remembered. In his place stood a tall, confident man with gentle eyes and broad shoulders. Mark's dark hair was shorter now, with a touch of gray at the temples that made him look distinguished. His smile, though, was exactly the same. "Sarah," he said, his eyes widening slightly as he took her in, "you look amazing." Sarah felt a blush warming her cheeks. "Thank you. You don't look so bad yourself. 10 years has been good to you." At the restaurant, they fell into easy conversation, catching up on the decade they'd spent apart. Mark told her about his travels across Asia, studying different massage techniques and healing practices. Sarah shared stories about her business successes and the challenges of rebuilding her life after his father had left. "Dad never deserved you," Mark said suddenly, his voice soft but serious. "I hope you know that." Sarah looked down at her plate, touched by his loyalty. "That's sweet of you to say, but marriages are complicated. We just weren't right for each other in the end." "And how's your back?" Mark asked, noticing how she shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Mom always said you had back problems, even back then." Sarah smiled at his concern. Even as a teenager, Mark had been observant and thoughtful, worse than ever actually. "Too many hours hunched over a desk, I guess." "I could help with that," Mark offered. "It's literally what I do for a living now." Sarah laughed nervously. "Oh, I don't know. It would be completely professional," he assured her. "Think of it as a welcome home present from me to you." As they finished dinner and walked to their cars, Sarah found herself agreeing to his offer. Something about Mark's presence made her feel at ease, like no time had passed at all. Yet there was something different too, a connection she couldn't quite name. "Tomorrow evening then?" Mark confirmed as they reached her car. Sarah nodded, surprised at how much she was looking forward to seeing him again. "Tomorrow it is." As she drove home, Sarah couldn't help but smile. Mark's unexpected return had brought a spark of brightness to her otherwise routine life. Little did she know that this reunion was just the beginning of something that would change everything she thought she knew about love and connection. The next evening, Sarah found herself checking the clock every few minutes. Mark had said he would arrive at 7 with his massage table. She had spent the afternoon cleaning her already tidy house and changing her outfit 3 times before settling on comfortable yoga pants and a loose t-shirt. She told herself it was just nervousness about the massage, not about seeing Mark again. At exactly 7, the doorbell rang. Sarah took a deep breath before opening the door. Mark stood there with a professional-looking folding massage table under one arm and a small bag in his other hand. "Right on time," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "Always," he replied with a warm smile. "Where would you like me to set up?" Sarah led him to the living room where she had already cleared a space. She watched as Mark expertly unfolded the table and covered it with clean sheets. His movements were confident and practiced. This was no longer the boy she had known. This was a man who had found his calling. "Do you have any oils you prefer?" Mark asked, pulling several bottles from his bag. "I brought lavender for relaxation, peppermint for pain relief, and a few others." "You're the expert," Sarah said. "I trust your judgment." Mark nodded and selected a bottle. Lavender with a hint of eucalyptus. Good for both relaxation and muscle pain. He turned to face her. "I'll step out while you get comfortable. Just lie face down and cover yourself with the sheet. Only expose the areas that need work." When Mark returned, Sarah was lying on the table, her face resting in the cushioned hole, a sheet covering her back. She felt strangely vulnerable yet safe. "I'm going to start with your shoulders and work down," Mark explained as he warmed the oil between his palms. "Let me know if anything hurts or if the pressure is too much." The moment his hands touched her shoulders, Sarah had to stifle a gasp. His touch was firm yet gentle, finding knots of tension she didn't even know she had. As he worked his way down her spine, she could feel years of stress melting away. "Your muscles are so tight," Mark commented. "How long has it been since you had a proper massage?" Sarah tried to remember. Years. Maybe not since before the divorce. Mark made a disapproving sound. "You need to take better care of yourself, Sarah." As his hands worked magic on her lower back, Sarah found herself relaxing more deeply than she had in years. The scent of lavender filled the air, and the soft music Mark had put on created a peaceful atmosphere. "Tell me more about your travels," Sarah said, wanting to hear his voice. Mark began sharing stories of his time in Bali, learning traditional healing techniques from local masters. His voice was soothing, and Sarah found herself hanging on every word. She had always loved listening to him talk, even when he was younger. He had a way of making every story come alive. "In Japan, I studied shiatsu for 6 months," he continued, his fingers pressing specific points along her spine. "They believe energy flows through the body in specific pathways. When those pathways are blocked, pain and illness follow." "And you can feel these pathways?" Sarah asked, intrigued. "With practice, yes." His hands moved to her shoulders again. "Everyone's body tells a story. Yours speaks of someone who carries too much weight on these shoulders." Something about the way he said it made Sarah's eyes well with tears. It had been so long since anyone had really seen her, understood the burden she carried running her business alone, building a new life after her marriage ended. "Sorry," she whispered, embarrassed by her emotional response. "Never apologize for feeling," Mark said softly, his hands never pausing in their healing work. "Part of my job is creating a safe space for release." As he continued the massage, they fell into comfortable conversation about simpler topics: favorite movies they'd seen recently, books they'd read, changes in their hometown. Sarah found herself laughing more than she had in months. When the hour was over, Sarah felt like a new person. Her back pain had diminished to a dull memory, and a pleasant warmth had spread throughout her body. "How do you feel?" Mark asked as he helped her sit up, keeping his eyes respectfully averted until she had adjusted her clothing. "Amazing," Sarah admitted. "You really are talented." Mark smiled, clearly pleased by her praise. "I'd like to do this regularly until we get those knots completely worked out. Twice a week would be ideal." Sarah started to protest, concerned about taking advantage of his kindness, but Mark shook his head. "Consider it making up for 10 years of missed birthdays and holidays," he insisted. "Please, Sarah, let someone take care of you for a change." Looking into his sincere eyes, Sarah found she couldn't refuse. "Okay," she agreed, "twice a week." 2 weeks passed, and Sarah's massage sessions with Mark became the highlight of her days. Each Tuesday and Friday evening, she would rush home from work, excited for his visit. Her back pain had improved greatly. but she found herself looking forward to their conversations even more than the physical relief. On this particular Friday, rain pattered against the windows as Mark worked on a stubborn knot in her shoulder. Sarah was telling him about a difficult client at work when she noticed his hands pause briefly. "Everything okay?" she asked. Mark resumed his massage, but something felt different. His touch seemed hesitant, almost nervous. "Sarah, there's something I've been wanting to tell you," he said finally. His voice had a strange quality to it. "You can tell me anything," Sarah said, curious about what could make confident Mark sound so uncertain. Mark's hands continued to work on her back, but his rhythm had changed. "Do you remember how I always used to write stories when I was younger? Before I left for college?" Sarah smiled at the memory. "Of course. You were always scribbling in those notebooks. Your father thought you were wasting your time, but I always believed you had talent." "That meant a lot to me," Mark said softly. "More than you know." His hands moved to her lower back, working out a tight spot that made Sarah sigh with relief. "The thing is," Mark continued, "I never stopped writing. Even while studying massage therapy, even while traveling, I kept writing." "That's wonderful," Sarah said. "I'm glad you didn't give up on your passion." There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of rain and the soft music playing in the background. Sarah could feel tension radiating from Mark's hands. "I wrote a book," he finally said. "A novel. And it's being published next month." Sarah gasped and almost sat up before remembering she was still mid-massage. "Mark, that's amazing. Why would you be nervous to tell me that?" Mark's hands stilled completely now. "Because it's about you." Sarah froze. "What do you mean about me?" Mark took a deep breath. "Not exactly you. It's fiction. But the main character, she's inspired by you. By your strength, your kindness, your resilience. How you rebuilt your life after my father left. How you supported me even when he didn't." Sarah didn't know what to say. Her heart was racing. "I changed all the details, of course," Mark rushed to add. "Different name, different career. But her spirit, her essence. That's all you, Sarah." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. No one had ever done something like this for her. No one had ever seen her so deeply, appreciated her in such a profound way. "I should have asked permission," Mark said, misinterpreting her silence. "I'm sorry if—" "No," Sarah interrupted, "don't apologize. I'm just overwhelmed. In a good way." Mark resumed the massage, his touch gentler now. "There's more," he said quietly. Sarah waited, hardly daring to breathe. In the story, she meets someone who helps her see her own worth, someone who falls in love with her courage, her smile, the way she faces life's challenges. His voice dropped even lower. "That part, that's not entirely fiction either." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah felt her heart pounding so hard she was sure Mark could feel it through his hands on her back. "Mark," she whispered, not knowing what else to say. "I know it's complicated," he said. "Our history, the age difference, what people might think. But these past weeks, being with you again, Sarah, I can't pretend I don't feel something more than friendship." Sarah closed her eyes, emotions washing over her. Fear, excitement, confusion, and something else, something that felt surprisingly like hope. "You don't have to say anything now," Mark added quickly. "The massage is almost done. Take some time to think." As Mark's hands made their final, soothing strokes across her shoulders, Sarah realized that this revelation, this beautiful, unexpected declaration, had changed everything. What had started as a simple reconnection with her former stepson had evolved into something she never saw coming, something that both terrified and thrilled her. A week passed after Mark's confession, and Sarah had not called to schedule another massage. Her mind had been in turmoil, thoughts of Mark filling every quiet moment. She had read the manuscript of his novel that he had left with her, staying up late into the night, moved to tears by the beautiful way he had captured her essence in the character of Elena, a woman who rebuilt her life after losing everything. When her phone rang on Friday evening, Sarah's heart jumped seeing Mark's name. She answered after taking a deep breath. "I was starting to think you never wanted to see me again," Mark said, his voice gentle with no hint of accusation. "I needed time," Sarah replied honestly. "Your revelation was unexpected." "I understand. Too much, too soon." "No," Sarah said quickly. Not too much, just different than what I was prepared for. There was a pause. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow? Not as your massage therapist, not as your former stepson, just as Mark. Sarah closed her eyes, knowing her answer would change everything. Yes, I would like that. The next evening, Mark picked her up wearing a crisp blue shirt that matched his eyes. Sarah had chosen a simple red dress that made her feel both elegant and desirable. Something had shifted between them, a tension, an awareness that hadn't been there before. Mark took her to a small Italian restaurant outside of town where they wouldn't run into anyone they knew. As they shared a bottle of wine, their conversation flowed easily, but beneath it ran an undercurrent of anticipation. I finished reading your book, Sarah said as they waited for dessert. It's beautiful, Mark, truly. Mark's eyes lit up. You really think so? The way you write about life, about second chances, it moved me deeply. She hesitated. The love story, is that really how you see me? Mark reached across the table and took her hand. Yes. I've always seen you that way. Even years ago, before I left, I admired you. But I was too young then, and you were married to my father. When I came back and saw you again, those feelings returned stronger than before. Sarah felt heat rising to her cheeks. In the dim light of the restaurant, Mark looked so handsome, so earnest. I've been thinking about you too. More than I should, probably. There's no should here, Sarah. We're both adults. We care about each other. The rest is just circumstances. After dinner, Mark drove her home. The car ride was quiet, filled with unspoken thoughts. When they arrived at her house, he walked her to the door. Would you like to come in? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Inside, Sarah poured them each a glass of wine. They sat on the couch, closer than they had ever sat before. I'm scared, Sarah admitted. Not of you, but of what I'm feeling. Mark set down his glass and turned to face her. I would never hurt you, Sarah. I know that. She looked into his eyes. But what about everyone else? What would people say if they knew? Do they matter more than what we feel? Mark asked softly. He reached up and gently touched her cheek. What do you feel, Sarah? Sarah leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. Alive, she whispered. For the first time in years, I feel alive. When his lips finally met hers, Sarah felt as if something long dormant inside her had awakened. The kiss was tender at first, almost questioning, but deepened as she responded. His hand slid to the back of her neck, drawing her closer. Sarah broke the kiss, breathless. This changes everything, she said. Mark nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. Are you ready for that? Instead of answering with words, Sarah kissed him again, more boldly this time. Years of loneliness melted away in the warmth of his embrace. His hands were gentle as they caressed her back, the same hands that had healed her pain, now igniting a different kind of fire. Stay with me tonight, Sarah whispered against his lips. Mark pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. Are you sure? Sarah had never been more sure of anything. The connection between them was rare and precious, something worth embracing despite the complications. I've never been more sure, she said, taking his hand and leading him toward her bedroom, where the rest of their new story would begin. Morning light streamed through Sarah's bedroom curtains, casting a warm glow over Mark's sleeping face. Sarah watched him, still hardly believing the night they had shared. His features were relaxed in sleep, one arm draped protectively around her waist. She traced the line of his jaw with her finger, marveling at how right it felt to be with him, despite all the reasons it should have felt wrong. Mark's eyes fluttered open, and a slow smile spread across his face when he saw her. Good morning, he murmured, pulling her closer. Good morning, Sarah whispered back, resting her head on his chest. She could hear the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. Any regrets? Mark asked, his fingers gently running through her hair. Sarah thought for a moment. None, she said truthfully. But I am afraid. Mark shifted to look at her. Of what? Of what happens next. Of what people will say. We live in a small town, Mark. People talk. Mark sighed, kissing her forehead. Let them talk. We're not doing anything wrong. But even as he said it, Sarah knew it wouldn't be that simple. Mark might be fine with the world knowing about them, but Sarah wasn't sure she was ready for the whispers, the judgments, the raised eyebrows. They spent the day together, making breakfast, taking a walk in the park, sharing quiet moments of discovery. It felt like the beginning of something precious, something to be protected from the harsh light of public opinion. On Monday, reality intruded when Sarah ran into Beth, an old friend, at the grocery store. "Sarah, I heard Mark is back in town," Beth said, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Janet saw you two having dinner at Bellini's on Saturday. I didn't know you two were still in touch." Sarah felt her face grow warm. "Yes, we reconnected recently. He's teaching at the massage school now." Beth's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "How nice. And dinner at Bellini's?" "That's where Tom and I go for our anniversary." "Very romantic." Sarah busied herself selecting apples, avoiding Beth's gaze. "Mark was just catching me up on his travels. It was nice to reconnect." "I'm sure it was," Beth said, her tone making it clear she suspected more. "Well, tell him I said hello. Such a handsome young man he's grown into." The emphasis on young wasn't lost on Sarah. As she drove home, her stomach twisted with anxiety. If Beth suspected something from just one dinner, how long before the whole town knew? When Mark came over that evening, Sarah was quiet, distracted. He noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, taking her hands in his. Sarah told him about the encounter with Beth. It's starting already, the questions, the assumptions. Mark frowned. "Does it matter so much what people think?" "It's not just about what they think of me," Sarah said. "Your career is just beginning. The massage school, your book coming out. Do you really want to be known as the guy who's sleeping with his former stepmother?" Mark winced at her blunt phrasing. "When you put it like that, it sounds—" "Exactly," Sarah said. "That's how they'll see it. Not the way we do." Mark pulled her into his arms. "Then we'll be more careful. Keep things private until people get used to seeing us together again. We don't have to announce anything." Sarah nodded against his chest, but doubts had already taken root. She loved being with Mark, loved the way he made her feel desired and understood. But was she being selfish? Was she putting her happiness above his future? Later that night, as they lay tangled in her sheets, Sarah watched Mark sleep again. His face was peaceful, untroubled by the complications that weighed on her mind. She gently touched the silver at his temples, evidence of the man he had become in their years apart. "I love you," she whispered, testing the words she hadn't yet said aloud to him. They felt right in her mouth, true in her heart. But was love enough to overcome the obstacles they would face? As if sensing her turmoil even in sleep, Mark pulled her closer. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to focus on the present moment. The warmth of his body, the safety of his arms, the connection they had rediscovered. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight, at least, they had this. 3 weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and secret meetings. Sarah and Mark had fallen into a routine, careful to avoid being seen together in public places. Mark spent most nights at Sarah's house but always left early in the morning. The secrecy was wearing on them both, but especially on Mark. One evening, as they sat on Sarah's patio watching the sunset, Mark brought up the subject they had been avoiding. "I got a call today," he said, his fingers laced with hers. "My publisher wants me to do a small book tour when the novel comes out next month. 3 cities, 2 weeks. Sarah squeezed his hand. "That's wonderful news. Your first book tour. I'm so proud of you." Mark turned to face her. "Come with me." Sarah's smile faded. "Mark, I can't just leave work for 2 weeks. "Why not? You own the business. You have capable staff. You deserve a vacation." His eyes were intense, hopeful. "Think about it, Sarah. 2 weeks where we don't have to hide, where no one knows our history, where we can just be together like any other couple." The idea was tempting, so tempting that Sarah felt her resolve weakening. "What about when we come back?" "Nothing will have changed here." Mark took both her hands now. "Maybe everything will have changed because we'll have changed. Sarah, I love you. I'm tired of sneaking around like we're doing something wrong." It was the first time he had said those words aloud, and they hung in the air between them, powerful and transformative. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "That's why I'm so afraid of ruining your life." Mark's face softened. "You could never ruin my life. You are the best part of it." That night, their lovemaking had an edge of desperation, as if both were trying to convince the other of the depth of their feelings through touch alone. Afterward, as they lay in the quiet darkness, Sarah made her decision. I'll go with you, she said softly, on your book tour. Mark pulled her close, his joy evident in the tightening of his arms around her. We leave in 3 weeks. It's going to be amazing, Sarah, you'll see. For the first time since they had begun their relationship, Sarah allowed herself to hope for a future without hiding, without shame. She fell asleep in Mark's arms, her mind filled with possibilities. The next morning, Sarah woke to find Mark already dressed and sitting on the edge of the bed, his face serious. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting up. "I got a text from my friend at the massage school. Apparently, there's a rumor going around town about us." Mark's voice was tight with anger. "Someone saw my car here overnight." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What kind of rumor?" "The kind that makes me sound like I'm taking advantage of my vulnerable former stepmother." Mark ran a hand through his hair. "The kind that makes you sound desperate and inappropriate." Sarah closed her eyes, the happy bubble of the previous night completely burst. "I was afraid of this." Mark moved closer to her. "I don't care what they say about me, but I won't let them talk about you like that." "What can we do?" Sarah asked, feeling helpless. Mark's expression was determined. "We can stop hiding. We can show them this is real, not some sordid affair. I want to take you to my book launch party next week, as my date." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. "Mark, that's so public. Everyone will be there." "Exactly." Mark took her hands. "I'm not ashamed of loving you, Sarah. I won't let them make me feel like I should be." Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing the man who had written a book inspired by her strength. Could she find that strength in herself now? "Think about it," Mark said gently. "But know that whatever you decide, I'm not going anywhere. They can talk all they want. What we have is worth fighting for." As he left for work, Sarah sat alone in her bedroom, facing the moment of truth. Was she brave enough to claim this love in the light of day, or would fear of judgment drive her to push away the best thing that had happened to her in years? The night of Mark's book launch party arrived. Sarah stood in front of her mirror, smoothing down the elegant black dress she had bought for the occasion. Her stomach was in knots. After days of inner turmoil, she had made her decision. The question was whether she would have the courage to follow through. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "Ready whenever you are. No pressure. Whatever you decide, I love you." Sarah took a deep breath and typed back, "I'll be ready in 20 minutes." When Mark arrived, his face lit up seeing her. "You look beautiful," he said, taking her hands. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah nodded. "I'm tired of hiding too. What we have is real and honest. It's time everyone else saw that." The drive to the bookstore was quiet, both lost in their thoughts. Sarah could feel her heart pounding as they pulled into the parking lot. The store was already crowded with people from town. "Remember," Mark said, squeezing her hand before they got out, "hold your head high. We have nothing to be ashamed of." Inside, heads turned as they entered together. Sarah recognized many faces: friends, business associates, former neighbors. Some smiled politely, others whispered behind their hands. Beth stood near the wine table, her eyes widening at the sight of them. Mark's publisher approached, congratulating him and eyeing Sarah with curiosity. "And this is—" Mark slipped his arm around Sarah's waist. "This is Sarah, my inspiration and my love." The woman blinked in surprise but recovered quickly. "Wonderful to meet you. Mark has mentioned how important you've been to his writing process." As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself relaxing slightly. Not everyone was judging them. Some were genuinely happy to see Mark's success, to hear about his book. When he was called to give a short reading, Sarah stood at the back, watching with pride as the audience listened attentively to his words. "The passage I'm going to read," Mark said, looking directly at Sarah, "is about the moment my main character realizes that true happiness sometimes requires courage. The courage to choose love over fear, authenticity over approval." As he read, Sarah felt tears in her eyes. He was reading from the heart of the book, from the part inspired by her, but also speaking directly to their current situation. When he finished, the applause was warm and genuine. During the book signing that followed, Sarah slipped outside for some air. She was surprised when Beth followed her. "So it's true then," Beth said, not unkindly. "You and Mark." Sarah straightened her shoulders. "Yes, it's true." "And he wrote a book about you?" Beth sounded impressed despite herself. Inspired by me, Sarah corrected. It's fiction. Beth was quiet for a moment. You know, when I first heard the rumors, I thought it was inappropriate. But seeing you two tonight, she shook her head. The way he looks at you, Sarah. I haven't seen that kind of love very often. It wasn't planned, Sarah said softly. It just happened. The best things usually do. Beth surprised her by touching her arm gently. Be happy, Sarah. God knows you deserve it after what his father put you through. When Sarah went back inside, her steps were lighter. Mark looked up from signing a book and smiled at her, that special smile that was just for her. In that moment, Sarah knew they would be all right. Later that night, as they lay in each other's arms, Mark asked, "So, still coming with me on the book tour?" Sarah kissed him softly. "Try and stop me." "And after?" Mark asked, his voice serious. "When we come back?" Sarah traced his face with her fingertips. "We find a place together. Somewhere with room for your writing desk and my home office. Somewhere that's ours." Mark's smile was radiant. "I was hoping you'd say that." As Sarah drifted off to sleep in Mark's arms, she marveled at how life could surprise you. What had begun with a simple back massage had transformed into a love story she never expected. One that had required courage but promised a happiness worth fighting for. In the morning, she would wake to Mark's loving gaze and know that the shocking revelation during that massage months ago had been the beginning of her second chance at love, a love that transcended convention and refused to be denied.